listen to get started with a little bit of your personal journey into the world of veganism. What's kind of brought you here?
Sure. So prior to becoming a vegan, I was a vegetarian for, oh my gosh, I think well over a decade. I first became a vegetarian when I was here in the States considered middle school, so about 13-ish. I had to write to a senator about an issue that I thought needed reform for a history class. And at the time, my sister had become a vegetarian, and I grew up in a very rural town. I was a 4-H kid. I had horses. We lived on a farm. Like, becoming a vegetarian at that time was very uncommon. And so everyone thought when my sister did it, that she was crazy, that it was a phase. And I really looked up to her. So when I had to write this letter, I thought, okay, who am I going to ask? Let me ask her. What does she think I should write about? And so she told me that I should write about slaughterhouse reform. And I was like, okay, what 13-year-old's going to say no to their sister they idolize? And so I started doing research into that. And I thought, oh my God, I cannot eat another hamburger or any of this again. Like, she was right. This is insane. And so from there, I started my journey with vegetarianism, through high school and into university. But like so many people, kind of had the disconnect about, the dairy industry and all that. I was one of the many that always said, oh, I can't give up dairy. Like, I love cheese kind of thing. But I dealt with some health issues in my early 20s and could never kind of rectify it. And I didn't always, take really great care of myself. I dealt with multiple eating disorders when I was younger. I finally found a doctor that would kind of listen to like what was going on with me. I'm trying to figure out how to take care of myself. And he said, okay, let's do a food sensitivity test. And so we did, and it came back that I was sensitive to casein, I was sensitive to gluten, and I needed to get rid of all this stuff. And at first, even after hearing that from him and seeking out this advice, I still kind of had this wall, like, it can't be the dairy. And so I fought with it a little bit in the beginning, but then finally I was like, you know what? I have got to commit to this. There's a reason. And so I did, and I felt immensely better. And then at the time I was doing a lot of running, and I was, researching into better ways to fuel my body and take care of myself, because I wanted to really rectify some of the damage I had done when I was younger. And so I was reading, different books from different athletes who were plant-based, and, they were talking about all the other things that they were doing and, the ways that they could fight inflammation and improve their athletic performance. And I thought, you know what? I've been missing out on all this. Like, this is right. And so I just further continued to lean into that. And, I slowly, I'd gotten rid of the dairy, but I still kind of hung on to maybe I still need eggs. But then after reading some of that stuff, I was like, no, I don't need this. And then doing a little bit more of a deeper dive into what, it took to produce all of that. I thought, you know what? I have blood on my hands still, and I don't need it. So what am I doing? And so I would say I've probably been a vegan now for about 4 years. It was a slow process to get to it, but I cannot imagine ever looking back. And I'd say the only regret I have is, why in the world did it take me so long?
I think we all share that one, don't we? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Thinking about the health issues that you had, the sensitivities, etc. Did you get the change that you wanted from these dietary changes?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, it was night and day. So along with being sensitive to casein, which is a protein in dairy, and gluten, I was also very, very sensitive to a starch called tapioca, along with a few other things like carrageenan and some other things. And so once I paid attention to all of that and eliminated everything that was an irritant or that I was intolerant to, it was honestly, I felt like a new person. There were so many times where I hated going out to eat because I felt like I was always going to feel sick. And, you know, even eating at home was difficult because I'd have a few things that I felt like were safe. But there was so much else that even though I thought that, you know, it was safe, still irritated my digestive system. And I never just felt quite right. And so being able to have that information was amazing. It was just really frustrating that it took so long to finally get an answer, because I had gone to multiple other docs before that, and many of them were like, oh, you have irritable bowel, or oh, you have this. And I never felt like, no, that's not the answer. And a couple had given me medication. And I was like, I don't need medication. I don't think there's anything really inherently wrong with me, but I'm doing something that I keep aggravating an issue. And we just need to get to that. So, you know, it was a frustrating journey. I'm really glad I stuck with it, because it made life so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine. The doctor that you finally came across who suggested food sensitivity tests, etc., had the word vegan ever come up in that conversation at all? Even at that point where you were he was telling you, or she was telling you, to cut out the, you know, these various things.
You know, I don't remember that the word vegan came into it, but I do remember him being very to the point when he was like, you know, if it comes back gluten, you got to get rid of it. If it's dairy, you got to get rid of it. He was like, all these things are very inflammatory. So this could, you know, be, you know, a couple of the big issues that you're dealing with, along with others. He was just very, very dead set on, if the test says it, you've got to follow through with it. And I mean, even though I paid for this, I went and asked for this, I was still reluctant in the beginning, because you're so set in like, oh, but I really need this. And, you know, you don't. Dairy was honestly the easiest part to give up. Gluten was a whole lot harder.
Yeah, I know a couple of people who are kind of gluten-free and vegan, and they talk about it being a whole nother level. Like, the veganism's easy, but they're like just gluten. Like, the world is a gluten minefield. Like, was that your experience?
Yes, I completely concur with them. I miss gluten so much, and now since it's been it's been 4 years plus since I've had gluten. I can tolerate cross contamination. I can tolerate small amounts, but to have like a giant baguette or anything like that, no, that will wreak some havoc. But my husband is a big baker. He loves making bread, just beautiful, you know, loaves of all kinds of crusty breads. That drives me nuts. So I'll just sit there and kind of smell in our kitchen and enjoy that, and just wish that I could. Now, like, I can't understand people's love affair with cheese, but I can understand their love affair with bread.
Yeah, well, me too. And sadly, it's good that I don't have an intolerance. Well, I assume I don't, but it does mean I eat far too much bread.
Enjoy it while you can.
Well, yeah, I always have this sneaking suspicion, though, that, I mean, obviously, in your particular case, there was, you know, some quite serious kind of side effects of eating gluten and so on. So it was absolutely you needed to seek advice. But I often wonder whether, you know, the majority of the population have got more sensitivities than they think they have. Do you know what I mean? Like, does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. People ask me all the time because they know, you know, what I went through and what I've gotten rid of. I mean, now it's kind of a joke about the things that, you know, I can and cannot eat. But there are other people that will come up to me after and they'll be like, okay, so I know you got rid of this, that, and the other. Like, how did you feel? How did you feel before? What was the difference? Because, you know, there are so many people with all kinds of digestive issues and they're also not getting the answers. And so, you know, there have been quite a few people, and some that have surprised me, that have come asking for help about what did I think that they should get rid of. But honestly, I mean, I can tell them what has worked for me. but what works for me is not necessarily always going to work for somebody else. So I always suggest try and find a doctor that will do a food sensitivity panel on you. There are also now online tests that you can send away for. I don't know how accurate they are, but they're available, and they could be a good starting point. Because even if, the elimination of diet was brought up to me, where you eliminate like the big major things of like soy, nuts, dairy, and gluten, even if I had done that, I still wouldn't have gotten to some of the other things like tapioca and carrageenan and, lentils can also be irritating to me. So that was only part of the puzzle. So the test really took out all of the gray matter.
Forgive my complete ignorance. Tapioca is it quite common ingredient?
Yeah, it's a quite common ingredient, especially in gluten-free foods. It's a starch. I mean, there's nothing really, evil about it or anything. It's similar to like arrowroot or like a potato starch, or even cornstarch can be subbed out for it sometimes. Places generally like to use tapioca in gluten-free baking as a binder, and sometimes it can produce a bit of a fluffier bread or texture than some of the other starches. So it is common in that. It's a common and thickening agent. It's found in ice creams to protein bars, breads, like everything really, I swear, has tapioca in it. That was honestly harder than the gluten to get rid of, because you just find it in a myriad of things.
Has all of this led you to a healthier diet? Do you feel like you've probably gone more whole foods, plant-based as a result? Or have you managed to weed out or seek out, I should say, the wonderful junk foods?
I think it's a balance. I do find some good junk food, but I'm probably, me today versus me even 7 years ago, far healthier, far more aware of what I'm putting into my body. I do try to veer more towards like a whole food, plant-based diet as much as possible. But, if a plate of really great nachos comes my way, I'm not going to say no. Or ice cream.
Well, yeah. I mean, who could resist? Absolutely. How about your sister? Did she go along the vegan journey with you? Was she vegan at the very beginning of this journey when you were 13, or was she kind of vegetarian too and discovered her way into it?
She was vegetarian for a very long time. I don't think she became vegan until, oh my goodness, it's probably been within the last 5 to 10 years. She was having some food issues as well, and so she did a elimination diet, and when she tried to add dairy back in, she got very, very sick. And so after that, she was like, oh no, absolutely not. And prior to that, she wasn't an egg eater or anything like that, so really it was just dairy. And so she's been longer than I have.
So how have the rest of the family reacted? So the pair of you, this wasn't a fad at 13. This was a lifelong change. How have the rest of the family reacted? I'm just intrigued, given the like you say, the horse riding background, the animal agriculture that was kind of built, the farming, the whole piece sounds like that world. How have they responded?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, honestly, I don't think that my mom thought that I would stick with it. But, she didn't push it one way or the other. It was kind of like, okay, do what you want kind of thing. I grew up with my mom, and so, she worked a lot. And so I had to take care of myself most of the time. And so it was a matter of me just kind of figuring things out. There was a lot of cheeseless pizza and random veggie burgers that I could maybe find in our local grocery store. But it was really, really difficult. Honestly, I think it was just my stubborn nature that really stuck me to it, because I wasn't going to let anything deter me for it, despite how difficult it was. I remember going to a restaurant when I was young and ordering there wasn't a veggie burger on the menu. So I was trying to get a grilled cheese like off the kids menu. And they were like, well, you're not a kid. And I was like, but you don't have a vegetarian option. And so they kind of argued with me, and I was like, fine, then give me a burger with no burger. And they were just baffled. It was like I had grown two heads. But I was just determined that I was going to stick with this and that it mattered at that age. And I mean, honestly, I think everyone else just thought, okay, we'll let her go with it. If you don't bother her, maybe she'll, forget about it after a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I love those places that won't let you order off a kids menu.
It's nuts.
I always think it's hilarious.
I know. I mean, truly, I was still a kid, like 15, 14, like you're a kid.
What point is it when you're legally not a kid, or is it when they just think you don't look like a kid anymore? I don't know what the stipulation is, but there we go. So, say la vie. So when did the love of travel kick in?
So I did not travel much as a kid. I mean, we did a little bit here in the state of Michigan, but really, I think one foray to Canada when my brother graduated college, and that was about it. I didn't actually, my first time on an airplane and my first real trip was to see my sister when she was in college. She was studying at the University of Hamburg in Germany. And so my dad said, okay, we got to go visit her. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get on an airplane. What is this going to be about? I was petrified. But once I got there, I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like all these things, all this stuff to see. And so from that point, and I was about 15 or so, from that point, I always stayed in the back of my mind that I wanted to explore places and do things that, were outside of the small town that I grew up in. I mean, even as much so, like once I, graduated high school and went on to college, I didn't know what I was going to do, like so many kids that age, but I knew that I had to get out of that town. And I moved to New York for a short period of time. And so it was kind of like that with travel. I didn't know how I was going to necessarily get to these places or see them, but I just knew that one way or the other, there was a lot of this world that I needed to experience, and I was going to do it. So I would say that initial trip was kind of the spur that kicked off a lot of things.
And at what point did you think, I've been bitten by this bug, and then you started to, I imagine, start to actually put that into action and make some trips and visit some places? At what point did you start to think, I want to write about my experiences?
That didn't come until much, much later. So last year during the pandemic, like so many people, I took the time to kind of reconsider what I've been doing with my career. Where do I want to align my passions, and how am I going to leave this world? And so I kind of started thinking about, well, I'd really like to work for a vegan business or a company, but how is I going to kind of repurpose the skills that I have worked on for this past 15 years or so and make myself seem like a valid candidate to some of these places? And my husband jokingly said, well, why don't you start a blog? People are always asking you about, like, what in the world do you eat? The premise, the idea when I would come back from trips, people would always ask me, like, did you starve? Like, how in the world did you find food? And so I just brushed it off. And so I even brushed him off initially and thought, no, a blog, that's a crazy thing. But the more that I started to kind of think about how was I going to make this pivot, the more that the blog started to make sense. And, writing about some of these things, because, then I started thinking about more that if people really think that it is such a challenge for me to eat when I go to Rome or London or wherever, there are probably other people out there that are thinking the same, that, it's too difficult for them, or they're never going to be able to find anything, and that's going to just take away from any of the experience they might have. So initially, I was like, okay, let's use this maybe as my career pivot and also as a way to help other people out there and to make this connection and show people that even if you're vegan, even if you're gluten-free, or you have loads of weird things you're sensitive to, you can still enjoy the experience of travel, and you shouldn't miss out on all of the wonderful things this world has to offer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, looking through the blog, there's a whole, there's an absolute, feast of kind of countries and guides that to those countries that you visited and so on. What's the, if you had to pick the kind of, the top 2 or 3 countries from a veganism standpoint, who was the most accommodating?
That is a good question. Off the top of my head, I would say a couple of the places where I've found it to be very, very easy has been Berlin is great. London is also wonderful. And then New York City. Honestly, I think New York City, even though it's not a country, it should be kind of in its own little vegan world, is amazing. We recently went in July, and everything that we did was kind of centered around food. Of like, okay, so in the morning we're gonna hit this spot, and then like a snack by early afternoon at this spot, and then we gotta have lunch at this spot, because there's just so many amazing places. And it's not just like one type of vegan food. It is a variety of different like cultures of vegan food. You can find whole foods, plant-based vegan food, vegan junk food, French vegan food. It is like everything in between. You will find it in New York City.
Amazing, mate. What's the kind of discovery process? How do you go about finding these places and selecting them for your day trips out and so on? We're going to go hit this place, this place, this place. What's that look like? Is it literally wandering the streets, seeing what's going on, or what's the process for you?
Well, it depends on the place. So like for New York City, I did a lot of investigating prior to leaving, and just, kind of reading reviews, looking at different places and their menus, and, did they offer gluten-free stuff is also kind of a big thing for me. Or are there things that people really talk about that we need to make sure that we go to? So I kind of look at it from a few different angles and just like, pore over Google to find these places. Whereas then if it's a smaller place and, say I recently just came back from the Upper Peninsula here in Michigan, there are literally maybe 3 places where you can find vegan food. For my research is much slimmer. And then, there is a little bit of wandering around too and examining some menus as we, go through city, downtowns and little shops, and just seeing like, oh, maybe they actually have a special that they don't talk about on their website, or, that they're not putting up on social media. So there's kind of a mixture of different ways that I go about it.
Is there any kind of country that stood out as, that was tough? I loved the place. It was a great visit, great trip, but from the veganism standpoint, or maybe the food sensitivity standpoint, this is going to be tough for you. Was there any place that stands out to you?
Yeah, actually, Michigan's Upper Peninsula was that exact place. So, I've lived in the state pretty much all of my life, but have not spent much time in the Upper Peninsula. Oftentimes, people would bring it up. It's like, it's just a, beautiful place, tons of hiking. Lake Superior is just like pristine and flawless. Like, you've got to see it. And I always thought, yeah, but what in the world am I going to eat? The Upper Peninsula is dotted with a variety of small towns, and they're connected by large swaths of forest and long roads that seem to go on forever, where you don't really pass any other human life. So the mere idea of finding vegan food in these very small towns that are really, really focused on, fishing or their love of hunting is not some place that I think that I'm actually going to enjoy. But, COVID has really caused us to kind of slow down a little bit and to do more travel here in the U.S. or here in the state of Michigan. And so I thought, I got to check out what people are really talking about and how beautiful it really is. And so, prior to leaving, I did a little bit of investigation of, what could be a possibility, where could there maybe be options. And luckily, one of the towns that we were visiting does have a college there. So that did improve a little bit of the food offering. So that made it better. But it's one place that I did pack a cooler of stuff. I made a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But, the other part of it that I didn't even plan for with this is that because summer is kind of coming to an end up there, that slows some of their tourism, and people kind of are trying to get back to school, back to like other activities. So that makes opening hours really difficult. So there were a couple places where I was like, okay, I know that they have a veggie burger, or I know that they have like tacos that we could make vegan. We can go there, like no problem. But then getting to both of those places, the one was not open for 2 days while we were there. And then the other one stopped serving food at 3:45 in the afternoon. So I was like, oh my gosh, I literally am going to starve up here. What am I going to eat?
Has that been a bit of a correlation for you? That the more beautiful the place, almost in a way, probably because it's maybe more rural, like you say, communities probably more based on traditional methods of acquiring food, fishing, hunting, so on and so forth. Is that generally how it's worked for you? The more industrialized places, the cities, etc., tend to have a better offering from a vegan standpoint.
Yeah, I would say that is generally a good way to look at it, especially here in Michigan. Some areas of the state which are much more built up, and where there is a university and all of that, or have a lot of tourism. Generally, you don't have too much of an issue with finding, food. But yeah, the further north you go, the more tricky it can become.
Are there any kind of top tips for folks traveling to these places? Because I think like you, I definitely identify with that. COVID's helped us look what's in our own backyards a little bit more. And that's actually been for me, it's just been an amazing sort of journey of discovery, really, like finding out that there's actually some things right on my doorstep that are, beautiful places to visit. But, like you probably had some experiences where, I'm making a sides tapas, as I would call it, out of, the side salad and the chips and so on, fries. What's your kind of top tips for folks in those situations so that they don't feel like they're missing out, but they still want to travel to these places, but they don't feel like they're missing out from a food perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my first tip would be to check out, my site and, the travel guides and any of that, so then I can take any of the work out of it for you. But if I don't have any content on it, do a little Googling. If you find a place, my top thing for people is to make sure you pin it on your Google map and then download the map before you go while you're on Wi-Fi or, while you're still connected, so that, you can save some data that way. But that way, then if you lose connection, like say going to Michigan's Upper Peninsula where there's literally no self-service, your map will still work. And you'll be able to see like, okay, my pin is over here and I'm here. Like you can still kind of get to it. So you don't feel like, great, I'm lost and now I'm hungry and I will never find this place. If you're traveling abroad, I always tell people you have to learn a little bit of the language. I actually made little cheat sheets of phrases in different languages. From like, is this gluten-free, to I don't eat meat or dairy, or where is there a vegan restaurant, so that, that takes some of the guessing out of it too. And even if the person does speak some English, trying in their language will absolutely help bridge that gap. And I've always found that then that makes them want to help you more. Because, you're being polite. It's a respectful thing to do. And then always pack snacks. I never leave home, even if, I'm not going very far, without snacks. And, if I am going far, I do pack extra. And, I will find out if there's a market nearby and pop into that market when I get wherever I'm going and pick up extra things just to have on me, like nuts or peanut butter, have some fruit, things like that. So you just have it, wherever you're staying, and it's within easy access. So, if hunger strikes, you are prepared.
And you mentioned there about, the speaking a bit of the language. I think it's, it's a fantastic tip for anyone, but probably, like you say, probably even more essential for us vegan folks, and certainly folks with food sensitivities, and heaven forbid somebody with allergies and so on and so forth, where they really have to be able to communicate this stuff really clearly. Just thinking about purely from a veganism standpoint, are there certain countries where that you're, in your experience, almost the word vegan hasn't gone across, even in the different language, and describing it in the way of, these are the things that I can't eat, like excluding them almost by individually has been more effective? Have there been countries where, even though necessarily the language of veganism hasn't necessarily translated as well?
Yeah, actually, that is a really good question. We were in Costa Rica, and that was a little bit more difficult there. Wasn't as widely known. I had to do a little bit more explaining with that. I'm trying to think where else. Honestly, it comes down to like smaller places that are far more like meat intensive, that were a little bit more difficult. But most of the major cities, no, it was pretty easy. I do recall one time we were in Rome, and kind of had gotten off the beaten path and had found a few little shops and things. And so I asked the guy in my best Italian if there was anything that was gluten-free and vegan. And he did look at me sideways. And so I tried my best to explain what in the world I meant. And we just both decided, no, there wasn't anything that I could eat.
Which one have you found more difficult to get catered for? The gluten-free, the food sensitivities, or the vegan aspect?
Nowadays it seems like it's pretty easy to find one or the other, but finding the combination of vegan and gluten-free can be really challenging. Especially, if you're going somewhere that maybe isn't a hub of activity. The gluten-free and the vegan can be really difficult. And the gluten-free sometimes hangs people up a little bit more than like if I say like no dairy, is there eggs in that? Like people are like, okay, I get it, dairy and eggs, fine. But then if I'm like gluten, and they're like, what do you want now? Do you want a lettuce wrap? Like, come on, lady, get out of here.
Have you struck upon any situations where struck gold, where you've gone to a place, perhaps another country, and discovered a gluten-free kind of vegan restaurant, and just been like, this is like absolutely mecca for me?
Yeah, Berlin was definitely an easier one. There were all kinds of things. I remember having a really amazing donut at a place called Brahmi Bells. They make amazing donuts. They're just beautiful. If you've never checked them out on Instagram. Just amazing. And so they have one that is vegan and gluten-free. That was terrific. I think they made it with like black bean flour, something crazy that you just wouldn't think of. And so that was really great. And then it seemed like, what else did we have? We had some Vietnamese. That was terrific. Super easy for vegan and gluten-free. Oh my gosh, what else? There was an amazing breakfast place with like beautiful acai bowls and smoothies. There was just like, that was one place where I was like, okay, there's more food that I want to get to than we have time for. And, London was also a pretty easy place for a myriad of different things. I don't remember ever having really an issue with getting around. A surprising place was Belgium. Before going, I thought, oh no, I'm stuck with French fries pretty much the entire time. But there were quite a few really nice little places that had, either like Whole Foods plant-based kind of stuff, junk food kind of things. And then there is a really great place that does vegan waffles. That is terrific. and I do believe they have a vegan and gluten-free waffle.
Oh.
Some of the stuff I do avoid, even if it is vegan and gluten-free, because of the use of tapioca. In Europe, I don't find it as often, but it just depends on how lucky I'm feeling with taking risk. I do normally always pack with me like a digestive to help break down anything that could be an irritant, or like charcoal tabs and ginger tabs to help kind of ease any kind of aggravation. And so those do really help. So if I'm like, I really have my eye on something that I just feel like is worth the risk, I will take one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can imagine. Some things are just worth it. Those donuts sounded like they were worth the risk.
Yeah.
Just thinking about, one of the joys of traveling, and I'll go back to my sort of omnivorous days. One of the joys of traveling is discovering local food. The things that are traditional to the place, and perhaps they're part of their heritage in that particular country or that location. As somebody who's traveling and is vegan and has some food sensitivities too, do you find like that aspect of the travel is more difficult to kind of experience? The reason I ask is because I sometimes wonder whether, and obviously I live in a UK bubble, but I sometimes wonder whether there's almost become a bit of an identikit of what vegan food is. That like there's the Beyond Meat burgers, the Impossible burgers, the the sweet stuff is kind of easier to replicate, the cakes and so on and so forth. So you get that kind of stuff, but it's often, in restaurant settings, junk food themed, pizzas, burgers, chips, cakes, these kind of things. And I just wonder whether, from your experience, you feel like you ever miss out on the kind of, what does the taste of, Sicily feel like, or, what's food in Lisbon taste like? Do you still get that from your experience?
Yeah, I think that is a really good question. There have been a few places, I'm trying to think, that maybe the replication wasn't completely there, but like in Lisbon, for instance, one of their big things is a little like custard patisserie. It's called, a pastel de nata, I think. And so it's like a crispy little phyllo crust filled with a custard. It's a really, really popular thing. There's a few places that like really highlight this, that's you've got to go there. They actually now have started making a vegan version of it, which is amazing. And, in Rome, finding vegan pasta options, even with their like gluten pasta or gluten-free pasta, like no issue, with that. But there are a few places where, that there is a bit of a gap with some of like the local cuisine. But some of it too, like even if I wasn't vegan, I'm not sure I'd ever try schnitzel in Germany or bratwurst, even if I was an omnivore. But then I've now started seeing vegan versions of that pop up as well, with some of those places who understand that travelers want to kind of have that connection to the destination, but they don't want the cruelty with it. They don't, want it for health reasons or so on. So they've now like made this vegan version of it to appease that traveler to have that kind of experience. And I always tell people, while food is amazing, and your food sensitivities shouldn't hang you up with the experience of travel, there is so much more to enjoy with travel as well too. The food part of it is just one portion of it. So don't forget that you're going to be having all these other experiences to go along with it as well.
100%. Absolutely. It's good to hear that there are places that are starting to think about that, starting to move beyond there's the burger, and actually, what's our dishes? How do we veganize these and make sure that people experience that? I think that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think if there have been too many places where they're like, a very specific dish they haven't veganized in some way. Like even in Spain, vegan paella was super simple and delicious. And I mean, vegan pretzels throughout Germany, you can easily get your hands on with no problem. So nowadays, really not so difficult at all. There is even, now this is not in France, but a French family moved to New York City and started this wonderful cafe, and everything is vegan, and it is all influenced by, their life from France and all typical French dishes. And so like beef bourguignon, I probably just slaughtered that, I'm so sorry, to other types of like crepes and other French style cuisines. They have mastered all of it in a vegan way. So it's really beautiful. I mean, I never thought that I would have traditional French cuisine because of being vegan. But visiting there, like the world was our oyster, literally. Even with, they had a dish that was scallops, but their scallops were a trumpet mushroom, and they were made in some kind of a vegan butter sauce, which was amazing. So, I mean, times have definitely changed. Travel 10 years ago versus now, it's just night and day.
Can I ask you a question about getting there? Because one of the experiences that I had, I haven't actually flown, I don't think, for about 4 years or so. Almost actually since I became vegan. I think I was pretty much around that sort of period. I kind of stopped flying and hadn't really travelled much outside of the UK. But my experience before that was certainly that folks I knew who were either vegetarian or vegan, but more so vegan, and certainly similar with allergens, on maybe on the flight or wherever, whichever mode of transport they were using. The options were very limited in those spaces. Like when it came to a flight, for example, you'd get a fruit salad instead of like the meal. What's your experience been like in those spaces? Have they moved on with the rest of the actual destination?
Yeah, flights have gotten a little better. So generally, with a lot of my trips abroad, I've flown Delta. Delta generally always has a vegan option, or it's deemed dairy-free, but it has generally, in my experience, been safe. And so normally it's something like a curry dish or a chana masala. And so it's been actually pretty tasty, and they always put the ingredients on top of the little packet as well too. So you can always double check as well. The only issue with it is, and I always tell people to double confirm that you've selected that vegan or dairy-free meal when you book your ticket. Because there was one time where I did confirm it at the beginning when I bought the ticket, and I didn't look at it again after that. Shame on me. And when I got on the flight and we got all settled in, it was great. And this was one time where I didn't pack a lot of extra food with me. And so I was like, no, it's fine. Like we've got the veggie meal, like we're good. And so it was for my husband and myself. And I don't think my husband at that point was a vegan. So like there's always a vegetarian option on flights. So it's like, that's no problem. And so when she came through and she went to hand me or ask me like, do I want chicken and beef or lasagna? And I was like, no, I've got a special meal. And she was like, oh, you're not on my list. And I was like, oh no, I better be on your list. What am I going to eat? And she was like, she showed me and she felt terrible. And she's like, okay, let me see what I can do for you. We don't have any extra special meals. That's what they always call them, special meals, which is just hilarious to me. She's like, let me see what else I can pull apart from other dishes that we didn't use back there to get you something. And so I was really grateful that she really went above and beyond, and she felt so bad. She tried to give me extra fruit, and I don't even remember what else she gave me. Some kind of a salad and, other things to make it work. But after that, I always just I will confirm it in the beginning when I buy the ticket, and then right before, a week before or so, the flight leaves, just to make sure that it is there. And I think other airlines, are willing to do things like that as well too, and they have options. There are some airlines that I have not flown, and there aren't too many flights from them in the States that have like very amazing vegan options. I think Qantas might be one of them. I could be wrong. And so even flights now and airlines are realizing like their customers are demanding more variety. It can't just be your standard chicken, veg, or chicken, beef, or, cheese lasagna anymore. And, that's really improved. I even one time, I think it was a morning flight, got a vegan yogurt. I don't remember the airline, but they had given me a vegan yogurt. And then at lunchtime, there was like a vegan pudding option that I got too as like my treat. And I was like, all right, now we're getting better.
Yeah, there's such a great top tip to confirm. Sounds simple, but actually I think that's where I've heard people get caught out with before. And to your experience, what can they do on the flight? They've only got what they've brought with them, so they've got to cobble you something together, and that's inevitably going to be probably a dry bread roll and a plate of melon or something.
Yeah,
that's
if you're
probably
lucky.
about it. If you're lucky, which if you're on a long flight is not ideal. Hopefully you've packed your snacks in your hand luggage.
Yeah, I will say we did fly from Detroit to Hawaii a couple years ago. And so prior to getting close to the flight time or whatever, I just thought, okay, this is an extremely long flight. It's about 9 hours in total. Like they should feed you on there. And so I remember I went on there to confirm the meals. And there was no confirmation. It was just you could buy food. And the food that you could buy was like chips, a ham sandwich, and I don't remember what else. And I was like, what in the world is this? And so I even sent them a message, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be on a really long flight. Like, where's the food? And they're like, well, because it's still considered a continental U.S. flight, we don't feed you. And I was like, oh, good Lord. And so...
9 hours.
Yeah, jeez. Right, with no food. And so... listen to me whine about it. Like, this is not even
I know, it's not.
Issue,
it's very first world, but at the same time, I struggle to go 9 minutes without having some food.
So in that case, we did make peanut butter and jelly and took them on. And our security here at TSA is totally fine with bringing food through security. I am normally look like the crazy snack lady when I go through security. And oftentimes now I kind of enjoy it because it always strikes some kind of a conversation with the security guys. And so I have learned that multiple security guys, like their significant others, are gluten-free or trying to be more plant-based, and they're really curious about this protein bar that I have, or this other thing I have in here, and where did I buy it? And so it's almost kind of been a small way of trying to help people, or even a little bit of activism to be like, no, look at my bag, go ahead and let's talk about what I'm eating.
That is probably the most unique form of activism I think I've heard of on the podcast to date. So I love it. Single-handedly converting TSA workers and their families. It's fantastic. You should definitely put that on the blog. I think that's like your strapline, your accreditation. That's fantastic. What's the response been like to the blog since you launched it? Obviously, you launched in trying times, COVID, etc. How are people responding to it?
At first it was a little quiet, and I thought, oh no, what did I get myself into? But I really had to take a step back and think, okay, just like me, nobody's really traveling a whole lot. I need to use this time to kind of make a plan, to work on content, to figure out what people are going to be wanting in the future, and, to update other things, and to make this be a great one-stop vegan travel planning shop. And so, once I kind of shifted my mindset with that, other things started to fall into place. And then, slowly but surely now, as the world's opening up and, I'm connecting with other people and talking about possibilities, people are like, this is so great. I didn't know that there would be options in, X town, or that, this existed, or, that I could find all these amazing ice cream options. I've even had people reach out and say, hey, what are your suggestions, I'm going to Cleveland or wherever.
Amazing.
And so that's been really nice too, that, you know, people are actually paying attention. I guess that's always the thing we wonder when we're doing stuff like this. Are we just screaming into an abyss, or are people paying attention?
I certainly wonder that a lot.
I guess. So when I get feedback like that with people who are like, this is an amazing tip, or can you help me with X? And I'm like, okay, it's working. And I've even had people who are not vegan who have said, you know, I really want to like look at some of these restaurants that you're mentioning because your pictures are amazing. Like, that's vegan food? Oh my gosh. Like, I didn't think that. Like, you're slowly making me rethink what I'm putting in my mouth. And so, I mean, that's really great too.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised because the site's incredible. The Insta is mouthwatering and beautiful with the visits as well. So I'm not surprised you're getting traction with it, and I think it's only going to grow and grow. There's lots of thankfully, I think we're growing. Our population is growing, and people are more curious, and I think everybody now, like, even if they're not vegan, has a vegan. It feels like they have a vegan friend, a vegan relative, somebody that they're traveling with. So. Yeah, I'm not surprised it's going well. More power to you. Rebecca, it's been incredible chatting with you. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned loads and learned loads from the blog, so thank you for creating it. And like I say, more power to you. Where would folks go to check this stuff out? Let's make sure we tell everybody where to head to.
Sure. So you can visit the site by going to veggiesabroad.com or follow along on Instagram or Facebook at Veggies Abroad.
Amazing. I will make sure we get all of that in the show notes as well, so folks can click on and visit you. But thank you so much for your time. It's been great chatting, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you for having me.